Good evening. I see we have some people in the room. We'll get started in a couple minutes. On your screen right now is directions, if you so choose, to have closed captioning, both in English and in Spanish. Thanks for joining us. And again, just give us a couple more minutes and see if we can get some more attendees. Welcome, folks. As I mentioned, we'll give it another minute to see if we can have some more people join before we begin. On your screen right now are directions to turn on closed captioning or subtitles should you need it. Alrighty, we've had some more people join. I think we can get started. Or if you could get us to the first page, please. So good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Rob Robinson, Long Range Planning Manager for the city.
And I'm David Castile. I'm the Housing and Community Development Manager with the city.
Again, thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to be presenting an overview of our draft Housing Element Master Plan MP123. A couple things right up front. There's going to be a lot of information and we're going to cover the whole document, but we encourage you to go to the project page and read the whole document. You'll be presented a lot of stuff tonight, but you're not going to be presented everything in the element. If you have questions, please use the Q&A function throughout the presentation. Our presentation runs about 45 minutes, so that leaves us, approximately, 10 to 15 minutes to answer questions that come in. If we, get a groundswell of questions and we don't get to you, they will be answered and we'll be posting it on the project page. Tonight's public forum, as with this afternoon's, is being recorded and will be downloaded and posted to the project page. And yeah, I think as will the presentation, and I think that's about it. So let's get started. Thank you again for joining us and giving us some time out of your evening. So the master plan is required by the state of Maryland. It's a required element, much like land use and transportation. And at a minimum, the housing element per the state law is to address low income and workforce housing. But we here at the city have used this as an opportunity to address a multitude of housing policies in general. Next slide, please. So the housing element was developed, and for those attending, you may have, taken one of our surveys or been mailed one of our surveys. Maybe you participated in one of the 7 stakeholder focus groups we did, or you observed one of the 4 joint work sessions with our Council and Planning Commission that we conducted. All of this stuff, along with staff research and all the background materials on the project page, really helped inform the creation of this document. Next slide, please. So the housing element itself is divided into 7 sections as shown on the screen. Next slide, please. The first section is the introduction, and this basically goes over the state requirements. It also has a high-level discussion on the importance of housing, not only to the city, but to people in general. And it also has the housing element vision statement, which is the city of Gaithersburg strives to ensure all current and future residents from all socioeconomic populations have access to a diverse range of quality homeownership and rental housing choices that are affordable, equitable, and livable. Next slide, please. The second section is just a glossary. It defines the various terms and acronyms used throughout the element. Obviously, some stuff is well known. Other things are more esoteric or more academic, so we felt it was important to include this. Next slide, please. The third section really begins the meat of the element, and this is the background section, and it includes a timeline of the city housing initiatives and efforts that have addressed housing over time, a complete overview of demographic and socioeconomic data, city or public sector regulated and market rate affordable units and overall housing stock, affordability gap in housing turnover analyses, pipeline projections, and all of this is done using maps, graphs, and charts, in a user-friendly format. And we ended up with a collection of key points to sort of help explain all this data that is presented. Next slide, please. So given that, we want to highlight some of the main data or important stuff that we want you, the public, to know about. Now, this is not everything that is included in the element, but some of the more high-level stuff. So as you can see, the city is projected to add basically 7,000 new households or 20,000 new residents by 2045, and also projected to add 18,000 new jobs. Of note, the city's current residential pipeline, this is plans of planned housing types, pardon me, over the near, mid, and long term is projected to add a little over 6,000 units. So with 7,000 new households, that sort of is like about 1,000 household gap over time. Next slide. Of note for a lot of people, as of 2020, the city's approximately split 50-50 between renters and owners. And based upon the various housing types that we have, only 18% are single-family detached, 27% are townhomes or duplexes. And really, unlike a lot of the other areas here in the immediate region, 51% of our housing supply is multifamily, both rental and ownership. So we know that everybody's heard a lot of discussions related to Arlington and everything else. A lot of those communities, have much higher percentages of single-family detached homes. Next slide, please. So with these homes, one of the things that everybody always worries about, is rental costs, income, sales price. The chart on the top shows, between 2010 and 2020, the two census, rent has basically increased by 30%, whereas income has only increased by 17%, and the sales price has increased by 14%. Of note, for the city of Gaithersburg, the median household income is approximately $92,000, but the median sales price is over $400,000, so more than 4 times, what the average salary is. The graph below says, what it shows is, 50% of all of our renters in the city are spending more than 30% of their income on rent. And of those 25% are spending greater than 50%. For ownership, approximately one in three homeowners is spending greater than 30% of their income. And of that 10%, are 10% of homeowners, 1 in 10 are spending greater than 50% of their income. So there's this real disconnect between costs and income. Next slide, please. And that's really shown. So we performed this data analysis, this affordability gap analysis, and we discuss it in the element. And what it really shows is it breaks out the various income levels. It shows the number of households within that income level, and then discusses the amount of actual ownership supply and apartment supply. So when you look at this chart, when you see purple that shows that there's a gap, that means there's not enough housing, and using the standard of 3 times your monthly income or 3 times your yearly income for rent or ownership, depending. While the vast majority of households in the city fall in that 40,000 to 80,000, and this affordability gap analysis shows that there's an overage, that there's more supply for that than is needed, we want to make note that that's really based upon rental. The 7,000, almost 7.5, a little over 7,500 rental units. At the high end, the high cost items, there is no apartment supply for that, and there's overages. And really, this analysis affirms what was just shown on the previous slide, is that people are spending more for their housing. They're having to go up to grab housing. Next slide, please. So what are the big takeaways? The increase in housing costs and the large proportion of households that are cost burdened demonstrate the importance of developing strategies to close this affordability gap. And really, these disparities in income and cost burden, you have to develop a variety of approaches to closing this affordability gap. A one-size-fits-all approach, isn't going to be adequate. It's not as simplistic as saying just build more housing or build this or that. So there are challenges. Next slide, please. So the 3 sections after this, 4 through 6, really get into targeted specific facets of the housing discussion: planning and zoning, city programs and policies, and equity and social justice. Each of these sections is structured the same and begins with an introductory narrative and, where appropriate, additional data. It has a collection of goals and recommendations and sort of summarizes at the end of each section with the key points, much as we just sort of showed related to the data. Next slide, please. So for planning and zoning, this section really is intended to address how city zoning and planning efforts can promote housing and support housing. There are 2 goals: promote or create opportunities for a variety of housing types for current and future residents of all income levels with costs that reflect the range of incomes. And the second goal is to plan for amenities and infrastructure so that existing neighborhoods can remain resilient and new housing is sited in neighborhoods with a community identity. Next slide, please. So let's get into some of the recommendations related to the goals. And these are summations of what you'll find when you read the actual document. So as relates to goal 1, really what we want to do from the planning perspective is continue to track trends in the supply and demand over time, figure out if there's gaps in specific housing types or where that affordability gap analysis will change. We also want to track our regulated affordable units control periods. That means when a regulated affordable housing unit no longer has legal restrictions, and really track the impacts on the market rate inventory. We want to continue to study underutilized commercial sites for potential residential conversions or infill redevelopments. And we want to study regulatory options for different types of ownership, models, such, through the zoning, co-housing, co-ops, or shared ownership structures. Oftentimes zoning ordinance say you can only have quote unquote 1 family per household. And maybe this is, there should be a new way to look at things. Next slide, please. Following on, additional stuff related to goal 1, multifamily rental products should reflect unit sizes that meets renters' household size needs. One of the things you will see in the document is that right now the average household size in the city of Gaithersburg is 2.67 people. So what that really means is if you have developers coming in with a multifamily rental and they just want to build efficiencies, maybe that's really not serving the community. We want to establish a housing unit type mix in future residential development projects where appropriate. So again, if you have something and you're looking, you may not want townhomes because you may have tons of townhomes. So you may want to look at some of the other missing middle types to bring in. We want to perform ongoing reviews of land use zoning regulations and processes for barriers or obstacles to produce diverse housing. And as some of you may be aware, we have begun the Retool Gaithersburg effort, which is a comprehensive look and potential overhaul of our zoning ordinance. So as we do that, we are looking at it related to housing. And as part of that effort, we also want to study and potentially allow accessory dwelling units in specific single-family areas. This may be ADUs may allow additional opportunities that currently aren't there. So next slide, please. Related to the second goal, we want to foster a climate of full participation in cultural and civic life. And what we mean by that is, the more cohesive and integrated a community is, the stronger it is, and that bleeds over into housing. We also want to expand site development notification requirements potentially to renters as well as owners. Renters are an integral feature of the city of Gaithersburg community, and right now the requirements for development projects is only to notify owners. We will obviously want to promote mixed-use communities, and we want to encourage development near future existing transit hubs and employment nodes. Next slide, please. Continuing on with goal 2, what's really it's talking about with this is we want to make sure we're balancing infrastructure and support needs. Some of our communities are older than some of the newer ones, and they may lack parks. We want to make sure as we look at stuff, if there's opportunities to do more than housing for a neighborhood, be it transportation options or proximity to shopping, new shopping, or again, improving roads or integrating parks and open space. We want to continue to look at these things. We want to consider incentives for adaptive reuse of aging commercial buildings that are close to locations for basic goods, services, and transit. Again, if there's an opportunity to convert a declining commercial center into potential residential because it's surrounded by all these other positive amenities, we should be exploring those. Next slide, please. And lastly, this is a little academic, but it is important when you're talking about housing within a city. We want to establish a jobs to housing ratio of 2-to-1 for 2035. And what that means is that there's 2 jobs for every household. But we want to sort of tweak it with the intent that the jobs reflect the various career and salary levels that support home ownership. Not all jobs are created equal, as we know, and we need the broad spectrum from minimum wage, but also with the higher salary jobs to afford those increasing rents and home ownership opportunities. And as part of that effort, we want to define city employment nodes, and these would be areas that support a concentration of employment uses that reflect the sectors and salary ranges desired to be able to accomplish residential developments, ownership opportunities, et cetera. But residential shouldn't be there. A lot of places, we're feeling pressure to convert certain areas to introduce residential. So residential should leverage these employment nodes, but shouldn't be included in them. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend David to take you through the next 2 sections.
Thank you, Rob. It's great to be here. Here's another reminder. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A and we'll try to get to them tonight. This section of the housing element describes how the city's current housing programs address 3 main goals. It also introduces and recommends the consideration of other programs that could also address the 3 goals. The goals are, first, preserve existing affordable homes. The second is to help people remain in their homes or help them get access to better or more affordable homes. And goal 3 is really to use incentives to produce housing that the market does not currently produce or produces in sufficient quantities. The map on the right here shows the 2 loan areas for the Gaithersburg Homebuyer Assistance Loan Program. This is the city's workhorse loan program to help residents purchase their first home. These are 0% interest loans that help cover the down payment and closing costs. The city has helped nearly over 350 families purchase their first home. And the colors in this map mean two things. One, the green areas are opportunity areas. These are areas of the city where you can get up to $25,000 per loan per home, and they're mainly in higher cost or higher income areas. And the purple are the standard areas. These are areas of the city with lower cost housing or lower incomes. Next slide, please. So the next 3 slides will focus on goal 1. In order to preserve existing affordable homes, we need first to identify these units, where they are, what their condition is, their levels of affordability, and other characteristics. These 3 proposed activities would accomplish the first part of the goal to preserve affordable homes. We want to inspect and monitor existing homes, incomes, and price restrictions of existing affordable units. We want to use our city's code enforcement to identify affordable units that may need assistance or other units that may need assistance. And we might want to develop an early warning system from the results of the above 2 activities. We could consider several sources of information to look at the characteristics of that housing, the conditions, where they are, where it is in its life cycle, which means if it has a life cycle of 100 years, where it is in that cycle. Look at where the inspections and code enforcement actions have happened. Staff would work with neighborhood services staff on this effort. Next slide, please. The recommended activities listed here focus on city incentives that can help preserve housing affordability. These include the development of a housing rehabilitation program for both ownership and rental properties. A program such as this would use city financial resources to make repairs. They could be in the form of grants or loans and could be administered by one or more nonprofit agencies such as Habitat for Humanity, Rebuilding Together, and the Housing Initiative Partnership. Repairs could focus on one or more areas such as energy efficiency, accessibility, or correcting code violations. Other recommendations to preserve existing homes focus on expanding existing partnerships that achieve long-term housing preservation or creating partnerships that do not currently exist. These include other governmental agencies like the Montgomery County's Department of Housing and Community Affairs, the State of Maryland's Department of Housing and Community Development, and the federal government, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. They also include private nonprofit organizations such as the Housing Initiative Partnership, Habitat for Humanity, and Rebuilding Together. Next slide, please. An often cited way to preserve affordability for the long term is to create a community land trust. A community land trust is a nonprofit corporation set up for this purpose, typically purchases a property and keeps it affordable in perpetuity. It does this by controlling the land and then leasing the improvements in a rental situation or selling the improvements subject to conditions of a ground lease in a for sale situation. The city would not be the community land trust, but it could help its creation by providing technical assistance and perhaps funding assistance to help get it up and running and purchasing one or more properties. Next slide, please. Goal 2 is to help people remain in their homes and help people access better homes, both rental and ownership. The next several slides focus on this goal too. Both the city's community services and neighborhood services staff help people remain in their home or get into better ones. Partnerships these staff have developed with outside agencies and nonprofits can bolster efforts to help people remain in their homes or access an affordable home. The Housing Initiative Partnership is one such organization that community service staff works with on these efforts. They meet with people where they are, including on the street and at their homes. They then provide information and counseling and connect people to other agencies that can prevent evictions or find better, more affordable homes. The city could also survey existing renters and owners to determine the best ways to provide help. One place to start this effort would be renters and homeowners that the city currently has a relationship. Those who have purchased a home with a city loan fund or renters living in a city controlled moderately priced dwelling unit. In these efforts, the city would prioritize people most vulnerable to market pressures, including those with very low incomes, those with special needs or disabilities, and seniors. Next slide, please. This slide describes the city's efforts to help low and moderate wage households purchase their first home. The Gaithersburg Homebuyer Assistance Loan Program, or GALP, is its main pipeline to ownership. It's performed reasonably well, and staff recommends its review to improve its effectiveness and reach. There are several ways to improve the GALP program that are listed here. We could survey existing GALP customers to review how they thought the process worked, the time to secure the city's loan, the ease of the application process, and amount of funds, and more. We'd also look at larger GALP loans to help with more expensive homes. As Rob mentioned earlier, the median price of a house is very expensive, and particularly for folks of lower and moderate incomes, these get more expensive. And so if the city would provide larger loans that would help them purchase these homes, it would also reduce their first mortgage. We'd also look at other sources to leverage or combine with. There may be ways to work with Montgomery County, the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, the state of Maryland, and the federal government. These efforts could result in more first-time homebuyers using the Gaithersburg Homebuyer Assistance Loan Program to purchase their home. Next slide, please. This last slide on goal 2, helping people remain in their home or access to an affordable home, includes several recommendations. First is to expand the network of partnering agencies. This includes the Montgomery County government agencies like the Department of Housing and Community Affairs and the Department of Health and Human Services and the Housing Opportunities Commission. It includes nonprofits like the Upper Montgomery Assistance Network, and it also includes other advocacy organizations. By the city expanding and strengthening the network of partnering agencies, it can help more people obtain housing by increasing their ability to earn and save more money so they can afford better housing. This includes a range of financial literacy and education programs like the city's Financial Empowerment Center. This new center provides one-on-one financial counseling to strengthen and increase family and household wealth. It links people to education and job training services that can also increase wealth. It directly helps people with saving and credit reducing plans to get especially low-wage households on a better financial path. Next slide, please. Goal 3 of the housing element, policies and programs, responds to the need for housing that is either not produced or produced in a sufficient amount to reasonably meet the existing and anticipated future demand. If you remember back in the slide that Rob presented on the housing gap, it's really looking at those 3 segments of the market that are apparently underproducing homes. The next 3 slides describe actions the city could take. These include using the Housing Investment Fund, this is a city fund, as seed money in an effort to create a trust fund with the expectation that it would leverage other funds. The city should consider partnerships with other organizations to leverage other financing sources, both public sector and private sector. It could also work with large employers on ways to help them live closer to work, like subsidies or loans for moving into an apartment or a home. The city should also consider underutilized locations and more intentional expanded partnerships to achieve a wider range of housing options. One example of underutilized locations which could have housing or mixed use is the Frederick Avenue corridor. Next slide, please. Here are more strategies to create affordable housing. The city has 2 affordable housing programs, the Housing Initiative Fund, which I mentioned earlier, and the moderately priced dwelling unit workforce housing unit programs. The moderately priced dwelling unit workforce housing unit program is a program where any development in the city that's got residential, not anywhere in the city, but anywhere outside what's it called, the zone around in Old Town, anywhere outside that area where there's a development of 20 or more units, 15% of those units have to be either moderately priced dwelling units or workforce housing units. But the workforce housing units are only for ownership, and the moderately priced dwelling units are both for ownership and rental. Both programs could be used together to provide more needed housing. In one case, the developer could provide the moderately priced dwelling units or the workforce housing units, and then they could access the Housing Initiative Fund to produce a lower MPD rent. For example, a moderately priced dwelling unit 2-bedroom rent may be $1,900 a month. Adding a HIF loan may reduce that 2-bedroom rent to $1,400 a month, which would almost be a 25% savings. Another way for the city to create would create a Gaithersburg Innovative Housing Trust Fund to specifically leverage other sources of financing, other public soft funds and hard debt from public sources like Montgomery County or the state of Maryland, and federal tax credits or other federal funds to produce more housing. Next slide, please. Variations of what I've discussed above could include the following. First, make the Housing Initiative Fund loan recommendations based on innovative best practices. Innovation could come in the design, energy efficiency, and mixing of uses, such as including community centers, workforce training centers, and special use centers on the ground floor. Another place to make improvements to produce more housing could be amending the moderately priced dwelling unit workforce housing unit programs to provide units with lower rents, with more bedrooms, for example, 3 or 4 bedrooms, or needed amenities, including accessibility features. An examination of the moderately priced dwelling unit and workforce housing unit program could include a review of the current 30-year affordability period. Perhaps lessening the time could produce more units in the short term. So I want to pause here to remind our audience again, enter your questions in the Q&A on the left side of your screen. Next slide, please. This section of the housing element, the focus is on addressing equity and social justice issues and concerns. These have been identified in several efforts. A particular note is the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments' 2-year process to begin to develop a regional fair housing plan. The cities participated in that. The plan identifies barriers that minorities and low-income households face obtaining housing and other services. Barriers include actions that governmental and private sector agencies may have undertaken in the past, including exclusionary zoning and redline. More importantly, the plan identifies areas where local governments like Gaithersburg can mitigate past practices, and the city's draft housing element takes 3 approaches to this. First, what actions can the city take to address these matters? How can the city impact the ability of its minority and low-wage households to build wealth that gains them access to better housing? If residents do not have access to better education and resources to help them obtain better jobs or to start their own business, they won't be able to afford better housing, even with the support from programs like the city's down payment and closing cost assistance program. Services like daycare, English as a second language classes, better food, and more help people build wealth. That's the foundation from which to obtain better housing, a new apartment or first home. Second, where there are places in the city, largely through advocacy efforts, can the city address structural barriers in lending and real estate industries? And third, what can the city do to address matters of concern to persons with disabilities and seniors? The table graph on this slide shows how the city's racial makeup has changed between 2010 and 2020. Increases in non-white populations and therefore decreases in the white population. As viewers may know, Gaithersburg is one of the most diverse cities in America. Next slide, please. Let's continue with a couple more slides that help illustrate the challenges that minorities, especially Blacks and Hispanics and other races face. As you can see by the graph on the left, the incomes of Black, Hispanics, and other races are lower than whites and Asians. Following that trend, the graph on the right shows that Hispanic and Blacks have a higher rate of being cost burden than other racial groups. And what cost burden means is essentially meaning that they spend a larger proportion of their income on rent or mortgages and utilities than the standard is. And the standard is that you should spend about 30% of your income on rent or mortgages plus utilities. Finally, on this slide, the 2 charts show the disparities in rates in homeownership and renting. A majority of whites and Asians are homeowners, whereas a majority of Blacks and Hispanics are renters. This is important as homeownership is one of the main ways households obtain both stability and wealth in this country and in this county and the city. Next slide, please. There are 3 main takeaways from this last data slide. First, as we mentioned earlier, Gaithersburg is diverse and it is also aging. The population over the age of 60 increased the most of the 3 main categories by approximately 5%. Conversely, the population between 18 and 60 decreased. Secondly, and this is the pie chart on the right, nearly 1 in 10 residents has an identified disability. Third, the prevalence of disability is greater for people over the age of 65 years, almost 1 in 4 residents. The draft housing element has much more data and information, and we encourage you to read it if you've not already. What we have just shown you is but a snapshot of the data that provides the foundation for the housing element, the equity and social justice recommendations that I'll try to summarize in the slides that follow. Next slide, please. The equity and social justice section of the housing element contains 4 main goals. First, what actions and tools can the city use to foster opportunity of residents who currently have less? When access to better education and resources to help them obtain good paying jobs or start their own businesses, they will be able to they will afford better housing and may not even need support from programs like the city's down payment and closing cost assistance program. Services like daycare, English as a second language, better food, and helping people build wealth. That's the foundation from which to obtain better housing, a new apartment or first home in Gaithersburg. Second, where can the city most effectively advocate in policy and practices it does not directly control to improve opportunity and wealth building? Third, more specific access to or obtaining better housing, what can the city do to support action or agencies that can address the housing industry? And fourth, what can the city do itself to better serve the needs with a focus on housing related services of our seniors and persons with disabilities? Next slide, please. The next several slides address the first goal. What tools and resources are at the city's disposal that can improve the opportunity and wealth creation systems for minorities, seniors, and persons with disabilities? This list of resources, tools, and actions addresses services in areas that support opportunity and wealth creation. These include daycare and support services in residential developments, support for business creation for minorities and women, programs that address access to food, including healthier food, education, and counseling that match the city's diverse population, and support for and access to legal aid to help people obtain housing and other needed resources. Next slide, please. Here are several more tools and activities that the city can take. The city provides resources to support workforce development and skill training. It should continue to support and grow these programs. When it sponsors or co-sponsors job fairs, hold them in communities where there's a need for employment or better employment, such as at community centers or local schools. We should continue to support through grants English as a second language classes for non-English speaking people. And finally, as we mentioned in the policies and programs section, continue to strengthen and create programs to repair homes for existing owners and renters. A safe, decent, and affordable roof over a family's head helps them succeed in their educational employment pursuits and helps them create more wealth. Next slide, please. This slide focuses largely on housing-related actions and tools. First, we want to collect and track housing information related to lending patterns, where and to whom lenders are making loans. One place the city is already, one place we already do, the city already does this, is with its first-time homebuyer loans. 7 in 10 loans were made to low and moderate income buyers that purchase in areas of the city that are not majority low or moderate income, or the green areas in that map we showed a while ago. There are organizations that the city works with to create wealth and opportunity in employment and in housing. The Housing Initiative Partnership and the Financial Empowerment Center are two organizations. The city should continue to work with both as they have strong relationships with the city's lower wealth and minority communities. Both organizations have expertise to help people obtain both better employment and better housing. Next slide, please. The second goal focuses on the kinds of advocacy the city can do to address opportunity and wealth creation. The next couple of slides describe these recommended advocacy efforts to expand or strengthen services. There are several organizations that work in the city, but also in the county and other areas who have capacity and ability to advocate in housing matters. These include the Housing Initiative Partnership that conducts homeownership courses and counseling. They also develop their own affordable housing. Other organizations like the Housing Initiative Partnership can be asked to provide services such as outreach and education around estate planning to help low-wage and minority homeowners who may wish or need these services. The city would monitor how county, state, and federal regulations impact the cost of housing, both new construction and renovation. These efforts would also include support for county, state, and federal programs and incentives that improve energy efficiency for renters and owners. An example of this is the city's work with the City of Rockville and Montgomery County to apply for a Department of Energy grant. This could go for swapping out less energy efficient appliances into systems that are more energy efficient. Next slide, please. Here we recommend a range of advocacy activities to targeted small loan programs to help people repair or modify their homes, improve targeted employment education at the high school and community college levels, better access or access to Wi-Fi or faster and better Wi-Fi, and supporting minority contractors and developers and chambers of commerce and contractor associations. Next slide, please. The third goal in this equity and social justice section of the housing element hones in on advocacy efforts directed to barriers in real estate and lending institutions. Both of these sectors, realtors and lenders, play a key role in access to better and affordable homes. If minority and low-wage households can gain a foothold into homeownership, that is one step on the path to creating long-term household wealth. The next slide, 5 slides, address this goal. Community Development Financial Institutes, or CDFIs, are organizations whose mission is to obtain funds from largely private and federal sources and make loans to low-wage and minority people organizations that create housing or jobs. Advocacy organizations like the Montgomery Renters Alliance can work with rental agencies and owners to reduce or eliminate application fees and other costs that also create a barrier to rental apartments. The Montgomery Housing Alliance and Montgomery County can bring together housing developers to share their best practices that could also lead to more housing and fewer barriers. Next slide, please. This slide focuses on efforts the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments can take to remove barriers to housing, the lending, and real estate industry. The Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments is a membership organization of all the local governments in the Metropolitan Washington region. That's Northern Virginia, the District of Columbia, and suburban Maryland. The city is a member of this organization as well. The Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments has a board of directors and staff that work on matters of interest to the region, including planning, housing, and transportation. The Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, as I mentioned, was the host or organizing body for the Regional Fair Housing Plan, and it's a natural body to advocate to the federal government, federal lending agencies like Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, and government to support lending reforms to improve access to federally supported and regulated mortgages. Next slide, please. Support and advocacy efforts focus on other lenders, including credit unions. These are important community resources, especially for large institutional and governmental employers. There are special purpose credit programs that are designed to serve low-wage and minority borrowers that credit unions can access and support. They also address areas where the appraisal industry can be reformed and improved. And finally, the city should support the protection of disparate impact, which is a tool that identifies how minority and low-wage borrowers may be discriminated against. The Montgomery County Human Rights Commission is one place where such complaints can be filed. Next slide, please. Several financing programs where improved advocacy can increase access that in turn creates more wealth and opportunity include the following. Most of these recommendations focus on lending, such as support for FH, Federal Home Administration mortgages. These are important mortgages because they often require a lower down payment. They require more lenient credit histories, and they have lower credit scores, and they also have lower interest rates. Here I want to highlight the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. This is a program that allows the conversion from rental apartments to ownership homes. The Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program is the single largest source of affordable equity in the nation. It requires rental units to be affordable for a 30-year period. However, at year 15, the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit can be taken out for a conversion to affordable ownership. For example, a 50-unit apartment complex financed through the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit could be converted to a 50-unit condominium complex at year 15. This would create 50 new affordable homeownership opportunities for families. Next slide, please. This last slide of Goal 3 captures several other advocacy actions the city can impact. One is for the city to encourage lending and investments in equity emphasis areas. This means lending and investments in areas occupied by low-income households. To make existing low and minority communities stronger, we'll need to invest resources in infrastructure and housing to make them stronger. Another is to encourage the National Association of Realtors through the Greater Capital Area Association of Realtors to ensure that racial steering does not occur. The city can work with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments to advocate for budgetary support for the Federal Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity at the U.S. Department of Housing and Development. This office's focus is on helping ensure fair housing and addressing at the federal level barriers to lending and housing opportunity. It was the Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968 that led to many changes that benefited communities at the local level. Next slide, please. The fourth goal of the Equity and Social Justice section of the housing element focuses on the housing needs of seniors and persons with disabilities. Listed are activities, practices, and programs that the city can control and improve upon. They deal with the design of housing matters like universal design that create homes that are accessible to persons with disabilities. Features include cabinets, cooking and bathroom facilities that persons with mobility or learning disabilities can use. They include door width and access to accommodate persons in a wheelchair and more. To accomplish these features, there are opportunities listed on the slide in the planning and design phase, project approval, and construction phases that improve accessibility. And finally, to be preserved over the long term, housing of this type needs to be tracked and monitored and if need be, rehabilitated. So that concludes this part of the housing element presentation. Remember to put your questions in the Q&A. Rob, back to you for the session wrap up.
Thank you, David. The very last section of the element is we've taken all of the recommendations over the previous three sections that we've just discussed and put them into an implementation matrix. And basically, what this shows is who is responsible, the city and or an outside agency, for each of the recommendations. Do we feel that the recommendation or action could occur in 0 to 5 years, in the near term, or 5 to 10 years? And just to make everyone aware, typically master plans lifespans for municipalities is 10 years. So we're really looking 10 years out. Also, we have a category that says ongoing. Some of these actions aren't a one and done. We will the tracking recommendations that we spoke of through the various sections. These will be ongoing efforts that will continue beyond when it first started. So this is a very long section of the document, but it's helpful in understanding and will help inform subsequent master plan elements too, because we are going to consider these recommendations in this matrix as we look at other elements. Next slide, please. So where are we and what's next? The records for both the Planning Commission and the Mayor and Council are open, and we are accepting comments. The joint public hearing is scheduled for June 5th. So it's right around the corner, about a month off. If you wish to get comments in to be guaranteed to be included into the public hearing packet, we'd need to receive those by May 19th. But again, we will accept comments until both records close, and they are going to be open well beyond the public hearing date. We've talked a lot and encourage you to go to our project page. As you can see, here is the link, and I believe it's been placed in the Q&A field for everyone to see. There is additional, you can review all the surveys, you can review background data that didn't make it into the element, you can review minutes of the various focus groups. Basically, you can review everything how we got here. We also have the full element, draft element on that project page, and we will have the full record. So this recording, all the other things, all the comments that are received will be all put on there. As we mentioned, any questions we don't get to this evening, but if you've heard something or upon reviewing the materials, you have a question or a comment, use the housing MP at gaithersburgmd.gov. Feel free to submit it in there. Everything will be collected, and as the records are open, everything you send, if it's related to the element, will be placed into the record, so you'll be able to review it real time on the project page. So with that, next slide, and we will open it up because we have about 12 minutes. So if anybody out there has any questions, we are happy to try to answer things. Again, no pressure. We put a lot of stuff to you this evening, and you may want to have time to digest it, or as I said, go to the project page or read the element further. But we do have some time right now. So again, please use the Q&A function. Use the housing MP, gaithersburgmd.gov after tonight's webinar. Hopefully you're all formulating and busily typing. I see we just received a question, hopefully. So the question we received, I think believe it's been published, is what actions are being undertaken to ensure that needed infrastructure grows at the same rate as the proposed housing starts? What efforts are being undertaken to ensure that sufficient parks, trails, paths are available, whether they live on the west side as well as the east side? And what efforts are being undertaken that the tree canopy grows and that light pollution is mitigated? That's a lot of stuff there, so I will try to answer as best as I can. So for needed infrastructure such as roads, water, schools, the city does have in its zoning ordinance an adequate public facilities ordinance that covers emergency services, water and sewer, which is guided by the municipal growth element and the water resources element. And it also handles schools. You may be aware, a number of years ago, we instituted a school facilities fee. So certain schools that hit certain percentages, developers have to pay an additional fee into that school. And roads are always looked at, both through the transportation impact analysis, and roads in general are looked at, through master plan processes and our Department of Public Works. What efforts are being undertaken to ensure that sufficient trails, bike paths, etc. Some of the efforts that are ongoing is we continue to try to map where are our gaps in these things, and when a development project comes in, we can have them as part of the site plan review process, incorporate these things. But even outside of that, the city continues to look at the gaps for potential capital improvement projects that would be funded by the city. So, it's a combination. First, we have to identify where the gaps are, or if the new development's coming in, we want to ensure that these features are incorporated. But if there's redevelopment or infill redevelopment and it's close to a gap, we would have that as part of the plan. And it is regardless of whether it's west side or east side. Tree canopy grows. That, depending upon the development, as it comes in, it is subject to Forest Con requirements. So, that is always there. We're always looking at ways to expand, landscaping under the zoning ordinance is required. Forest Con is required and has its own section of the code. And we still, under our environment and sustainability element, have the aspirational goal of, maintaining or expanding our tree canopy. So between street trees and parking lot plantings that have to occur, as well as, more of the aesthetic and ornamental landscaping. So this great question. It goes to, how do you make a community resilient? How do you make it someplace that doesn't feel like a barracks, that we want to have people who want to come and stay here in Gaithersburg? So those are some of the actions, and that sort of goes back to a lot of the recommendations and discussions that occur under the planning and zoning section. So I hope that answered your question.
And Rob, we had another question asking about dates. The website says public comment closes on May 9th, but the presentation said May 19th. So
sure.
What was the difference between those?
I will be happy. So master plans in the state of Maryland require a mandatory minimum 60-day comment period before you can conduct a public hearing. And usually that 60-day comment period is related to the required notice to state and local agencies, but we open it up to everyone. So technically, We are expecting comments from the state, the county, other jurisdictions, other nonprofit or non-governmental stakeholders to be able to submit all of their comments to us by May 9th. We will then synthesize all of those comments that come in preparation for the public hearing. Resident, citizen, business owner comments, again, they can be sent at any time as long as the records are open, but the May 19th date is such that it ensures that your comments will be included in the packet presented to the Planning Commission and the Mayor and Council.
And Rob, I don't know if you want to mention also that the purpose of the public hearing is to encourage people to come out and speak during the public hearing as well. So if you choose not to submit comments by May 19th, but you want to come out and speak at the public hearing, you're also welcome to do that.
Yes, public testimony will be taken during the public hearing, so that is always an option. We have about 5 minutes left, and another question came in. Why does mixed zone, I'm assuming mixed use zoning, have a 40% green space required, but minimum requirements for the CBD? That's a challenging question to try to answer in 5 minutes because we have a vast variety of zones within the city. The mixed use development zone, in order to be there, has a minimum size of 10 acres. The CBD zone can have lots as small as, an 1/8 of an acre. So the 40%, and when it says green space, what it really means is open space. So it can facilitate swimming pools and ponds and parks and paths, playgrounds, landscaped areas, etc. It was more of a holistic mixed use vision because usually the developments associated with mixed use are much larger than CBD. So CBD was a zone that was created for Old Town, which, as many of you know, has been around now going on centuries. So it's not as similar. So it's a really difficult apples to orange comparison. All right, we have about 4 minutes left. Any other questions? Again, as has been placed in the chat, if something strikes you after the fact, feel free to use the housing MP at gaithersburgmd.gov to further submit questions or comments. Laura, if you could go back one more slide, please. So again, even though it is in the chat, for those who may not be in the Q&A, once again, substantive dates. You can submit comments till the records close, but to ensure for the public hearing, May 19th is the target date. Joint public hearing is June 5th. In-person testimony will be taken that evening. Again, our project page is right up there. And again, to submit questions or comments, Housing MP, all one word, at gaithersburgmd.gov. So again, we'll give it another minute if there's any questions, or we'll end 2 minutes early. Again, on behalf of myself and staff, we really appreciate you giving the time to participate and attend this. Hopefully it was informative for you. We really, encourage you to stay engaged in these various city efforts. They're not always the most glamorous or exciting, but they are very important, and we do want to hear from you in all of these efforts. So.
Agreed, Rob. It's great. We had a good turnout tonight, so thank you everybody for coming out and listening to us. And as Rob said, there's lots more information on the project website, and we encourage you to read the entire report, draft plan.
All righty, with 1 minute to go, if there are no more questions, again, thank you. Have a great evening, and we look forward to your continued interest. Take care, everybody.